I was holding a family-sized box of chocolate cereal while Sophie reached as high as she could toward the top shelf, trying to grab a jar of strawberry jam she definitely didn't need. "Careful, baby," I said. "That shelf is shaking." The words slipped out so naturally that for one peaceful second, I didn't even realize what I'd just done. Then Sophie froze, her fingertips still resting against the glass jar. My heart completely stopped. Slowly, she lowered her arm and turned around. Her long brown hair fell over her bare shoulder, right over the yellow summer dress I'd once told her made her look like sunlight. I'd regretted saying that the second it left my mouth. Not because it wasn't true, but because she'd spent the rest of the day smiling at me like she knew exactly what that compliment did to my heart. Now, those same hazel eyes were locked onto mine. "What did you just call me?" I gripped the cereal box a little tighter. "Careful." She raised an eyebrow. "No, the word after careful. I don't remember any word after careful." "Ethan." That was me, Ethan Cole, 30 years old, construction manager, homeowner, and supposedly a grown man capable of making sensible decisions. And yet, there I was, standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle, completely helpless just because Sophie Bennett was looking at me like that. Behind her, an older guy was pretending to read the label on a soup can while listening to every single word. "Okay, I might have called you baby," I confessed. Sophie's lips parted slightly. "You might have. It was an accident." Something shifted in her face, just enough for me to catch it. The playful spark in her eyes dimmed, and for a split second, she looked genuinely disappointed. But she quickly covered it up with a smile. "Right?" she said, turning back to the shelf. "An accident. That should have been the end of it. Just a slip of the tongue between two people who had been best friends for 9 years. Except I noticed her hand was shaking. And except for the fact that I had been secretly in love with her for almost 3 of those years. I stepped up close behind her, reaching over her shoulder to grab the jam myself. She didn't move away. Her back was practically pressed against my chest, and the warm, clean scent of her vanilla shampoo drifted up between us. Suddenly, the store felt way too hot. "There," I said quietly, setting the jar into our basket. Sophie turned around, leaving barely an inch of space between us. "You've never called me that before." "I know." "Not even as a joke." "I know." Her eyes dropped to my lips for just a second. It was fast, but I caught it. My heart started hammering against my ribs. "Sophie." "Yeah." The way she said my name felt way too intimate. I should have just come clean right then. I should have told her how many times I'd imagined calling her that. In my kitchen while she danced barefoot, on my couch when she fell asleep on my chest, or in the mornings when she wore my oversized sweatshirts and drank my coffee. But those moments only existed in my head. In real life, Sophie wasn't my girlfriend. She was the best friend who called me whenever her car made a weird noise, kept a toothbrush in my guest bathroom while swearing it didn't mean anything, and knew the passcode to my front door but still knocked every time because walking in uninvited is how horror movies start. She was my best friend, and the thought of losing her scared me way more than never having her. So I forced a small smile. "Can we just pretend this never happened?" Sophie looked at me for a long moment, then stepped even closer. "No." I blinked. "No." She shook her head. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." Before I could say anything to that, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and all the color completely drained from her face. "What is it?" I asked. She locked the screen immediately. "Nothing." "Sophie." "It's really nothing, Ethan." I knew every single version of Sophie's nothing. There was the annoyed version, the embarrassed version, the "I bought another pair of shoes" version. And then there was this one. The kind she used when she was deeply hurt and trying to hide it from everyone. Especially me. I held out my hand. "Let me see." She shook her head, but after a frustrated sigh, she handed the phone over. The text was from her mom. "Dinner at 7 tomorrow. Daniel will be there. Please don't make a scene this time." My jaw set. Daniel Hart, her ex. The guy who spent 2 years making her feel like she was too needy, too emotional, and too hard to love. The guy who cheated on her and somehow turned it around to blame her for noticing he'd pulled away. And of course, her mom still thought he was absolute husband material. I handed her phone back. "You're not going." She let out a dry, fake laugh. "You sound pretty sure of yourself for a guy who wasn't invited." "Good. That means I don't have to pretend to like your mom's cooking." "Her cooking isn't that bad. Sophie. She once served me chicken that was practically still alive." Despite herself, a small laugh escaped her lips, and I would have done anything to keep that sound going. But her smile faded just as quickly. "She invited him because he told her he wants another chance," Sophie admitted. "And what do you want?" She looked down at her shoes. "I don't know." That answer hit me harder than I expected. "You don't know?" "I mean, I know I don't want to be with him again." "Those are two totally different things, sophomore." Her eyes snapped up to mine. "Why do you care so much?" The question hung in the air between us. Right there was the door I'd been avoiding for years, just waiting for me to step through. "Because I love you." Because every time he broke your heart, I had to hold you and pretend it was enough just to be your friend. Because I'm tired of watching you give your heart to guys who only care about you when it's convenient, while I sit here noticing everything. The way you hum when you're nervous, how you hide your tears during sad movies, or how you always give away the last bite of dessert even when you really want it. But panic took over before I could say any of it. "Because you're my best friend," I said instead. Sophie's face instantly went cold. "Right? Of course." She grabbed the basket from my hand and headed straight for the registers. I followed behind, knowing I'd messed up. Again. The drive back to her place was completely quiet. She kept her face turned toward the window, watching the city lights blur together. Usually, she'd be in charge of the radio, complaining about my driving, stealing my sunglasses, or putting her feet up on the dash until I threatened to pull over. Tonight, her hands were just tightly folded in her lap. I glanced over at her. "Are you mad at me?" "No." "Are you lying?" "Yes." Well, at least she was honest. I pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex but left the engine running. As she reached for the door handle, I hit the power lock switch. She turned to me. "Did you seriously just lock me inside your truck?" I like to think of it as holding a captive audience for a serious conversation. "Unlock the door, Ethan." "Not until you tell me why you're mad." She narrowed her eyes at me. "You called me baby." "I know. And then you asked me to forget it ever happened." I panicked. "And when I asked why you cared so much about Daniel, you gave me the safest, most pathetic answer possible. You're my best friend." "I already know that, Ethan." Her voice cracked a little on my name. "That's literally the whole problem." My grip tightened on the wheel. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sophie looked straight ahead out the windshield. For a second, I thought she was just going to ignore me, but then she softly spoke up. "Do you know why I always leave my clothes at your place? It's not because your washing machine is better than mine." "It's definitely not," I agreed. "It's because I like seeing my stuff mixed in with yours," she whispered. My heart thumped against my chest. "And do you know why I call you every time I can't sleep?" she went on, turning her shiny, tear-filled eyes toward me. "It's not because I'm bored. It's because hearing your voice makes me feel safe. And do you have any idea why I hated every single girl you ever dated?" My whole body went completely still. You hated them? Yes. Remember Melissa? I was super nice to her. But in my head, I kept imagining shoving her into a decorative fountain. I stared at her wide-eyed. Okay. Your behavior at that wedding makes way more sense now. She held her breath. I look at you like that because you're the very first thing on my mind every morning. I told her, my voice low. And you're the last person I want to talk to before I go to sleep. I look at you like that because everywhere I go feels empty if you're not there with me. And Soph, I called you baby because that's what you've been to me in my head for years. A single tear trailed down her cheek. I reached over and gently brushed it away with my thumb. She leaned her face right into my palm, and that tiny bit of contact almost broke me. How many years? She asked in a quiet whisper. 3. Her eyes went wide. 3 years? You literally watched me date Daniel for almost 2 of them. I was trying to respect your life choices. It was a terrible choice. I realize that now. You could have just said something. So could you. I gave you so many hints, she argued, looking offended. I asked you to help me pick an outfit for our date. You wore that red dress because you knew I loved it, and you just said I looked nice. I spent 2 full hours rewriting that text message. Sophie let out a soft laugh, and all the tension that had been building up between us instantly melted away. But she didn't pull away from my touch, and I definitely didn't move my hand. So, what do we do now? She asked, her voice dropping. I looked down at her lips. Honestly, I really want to kiss you right now. Her breath hitched. Then why aren't you? Because I need to make sure you want this for the right reasons. Not just because Daniel's coming over for dinner tomorrow. It's not because of him, she said softly. And not because you're scared of being alone. It's not. And not just because I accidentally called you a pet name in the middle of a grocery store. A tiny smile formed on her lips. Okay. But that definitely helped. I leaned in closer until our foreheads were resting against each other. Tell me to stop, I whispered. Sophie closed her eyes. If you stop right now, I'm never forgiving you. So I kissed her. It was slow and gentle at first, like touching something precious that you're terrified of losing. But Sophie didn't pull back. She leaned right into me, wrapping her arm around the back of my neck and pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. 3 years of keeping my feelings bottled up just completely vanished. Every missed chance, every close moment, every night we'd slept next to each other pretending we were just friends. It all disappeared. Her lips were warm and soft, and when she murmured my name against my mouth, every fear I'd ever had just dissolved. Suddenly, a loud knock rattled the passenger side window. Sophie gasped and jumped, and I nearly slammed my head against the roof. Standing outside was an older lady holding a tiny white dog, pointing at the sign overhead. "You're blocking my spot," she yelled through the glass. Sophie hid her face in her hands, cracking up. I rolled down the window. "Sorry about that, ma'am." The lady looked back and forth between the two of us. New relationship? Sophie's face turned bright red, but I couldn't help smiling. "Brand new," I said. The woman gave a knowing nod. "Well, go park somewhere else. Love doesn't give you a pass for bad parking." "Yes, ma'am." I shifted into drive and pulled into a spot 2 rows over. Sophie was still giggling when I put the truck in park. "What?" I asked. "You just told a complete stranger we're together. Was I wrong?" Her laugh faded into a soft, genuine smile. "No." That single word changed everything. The next morning, I woke up to the heavenly smell of fresh coffee. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming, but when I opened my eyes, Sophie was standing right there in my kitchen. She was wearing one of my white button-down shirts, and only my shirt, with her hair thrown up in a messy bun and her long legs on full display. I sat up on the couch, rubbing my eyes. "You're wearing my shirt." She walked over and handed me a mug. "I've been wearing your clothes for years." "Yeah, but not like that." A cute blush spread across her cheeks. "Get used to it." I took a sip of the coffee. "So, is this going to be a regular thing now?" "Depends." "On what?" "On whether you're a good boyfriend or not." "Soph, I manage construction sites with 40 guys, and nothing in my life has prepared me for being your boyfriend." Her breath hitched. "Ethan." "Yeah, baby?" Her hands tightened in my hair. This time, the word hadn't been an accident at all. She looked down at me, her eyes suddenly soft and vulnerable. "Say that again." "Baby." She gave me a small, beautiful smile. "I really, really like that. I can tell." She leaned down and kissed me, and for a few quiet minutes, Sunday dinner, Daniel, and the rest of the world just didn't matter. Then, her phone started buzzing on the counter. Her mom's name flashed across the screen, and I felt Sophie's whole body instantly tense up. Her shoulders went rigid, and her smile completely disappeared. She stepped back and declined the call. "You don't have to go tonight," I said, sitting up. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because if I don't face him now, my mom is just going to keep setting these things up until I do." "You don't owe him a single thing, Sophie." "I know, but I owe it to myself to finally say what I should have said months ago." I stood up. "Then I'm coming with you." She looked at me carefully. "As my friend." I walked over, putting my hands on her waist. "No, as your boyfriend." The hesitation in her eyes didn't completely disappear, but she gave me a firm nod. "As my boyfriend." At 7 o'clock that evening, we were standing on the front porch of her parents' house. Sophie was wearing the same red dress she'd once worn on a date with Daniel. Only tonight, she was wearing it for me. At least, that's what she'd whispered while fixing my tie in the truck. Her hand was freezing inside mine. "You know you can still back out, right?" I offered. Before I could answer, the front door swung open. Sophie's mom, Diane, looked at Sophie, then at me, and then down at our intertwined hands. Her fake smile noticeably faltered. "Ethan, I didn't realize you were joining us." "He's with me," Sophie said firmly. Diane looked back at our hands. "As a friend." Sophie glanced at me. For years, I'd watched her shrink under her mother's critical gaze, but tonight, she pulled her shoulders back and held her head high. "No, he's my boyfriend." Dinner started with painful small talk. Diane asked about Daniel's law firm, and Daniel asked Sophie about her photography work, talking to her like they were old pals instead of an ex-couple whose relationship ended because he cheated. Then, Daniel reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box next to her plate. Sophie froze, and I went completely still. Daniel smiled. "Don't worry, everyone. It's not a ring." "Well, that would require someone here actually being excited about it," I muttered. Sophie gave me a light kick under the table. Daniel opened the box to reveal a silver necklace with a tiny camera pendant. "I actually bought this months ago," he said. "Before everything happened." "You mean before you cheated on me?" Sophie asked bluntly. The entire table went dead silent. Daniel's smile instantly vanished. "I made a mistake, Sophie." Sophie stared at the necklace, and I watched her face closely. She didn't look tempted at all. She just looked trapped. Daniel reached out to grab her hand, but before he could touch her, Sophie pulled her hand away. "I don't want it, Daniel. I've heard plenty." "Sophie," her mother warned. "No, Mom." Sophie's voice shook, but she didn't back down. You invited him here without even asking me. You decided I should just forgive him because he has a fancy job and knows how to act charming over dinner. I hesitated. Soph, that's not true. You loved how I made you feel. You loved that I built my entire life around yours, and that I apologized every time you hurt me because you convinced me I was the problem. You cheated on me, and then you turned it around and said it was my fault for being insecure. Daniel looked over at her mom for backup, but Sophie didn't let him off the hook. I said things I regret, Daniel grumbled, his jaw tight. You said them because they worked, she countered. Daniel glared at her, then pointed a finger at me like I was a bad impulse buy. And now you're with him? Sophie looked over at me, and her entire expression changed. The anger melted away, replaced by a soft, gentle warmth. Yes, she said quietly. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. The guy's been waiting in the wings for this since the day I met him. That doesn't make him weak, Sophie snapped back. It makes him patient. He didn't take advantage of anything. In fact, he almost lost his chance with me because he was so terrified of crossing the line. He never told me who I should be. He never made me feel guilty for having feelings, and when I'm with him, I don't feel like I have to constantly prove I'm worthy of love. Tears filled her eyes as she looked down at me, like we were the only two people in the room. For the first time in my life, love actually feels safe. I couldn't stay seated anymore. I stood up, not to pick a fight with Daniel, but just to stand right by her side. I wrapped my arm around her waist, and she leaned her weight into me. Daniel looked back and forth between us, his pride clearly crushed. You're making a huge mistake, Sophie. She shook her head. No, I'm finally stopping. Without another word, Daniel grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the front door behind him. Diane sat there in complete silence. Sophie turned to her mom. I love you, Mom, but you don't get to decide who deserves me. Then she grabbed my hand. Take me home. It started pouring rain on the drive back. Sophie sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out at the rain-streaked window, and I gave her the quiet space she needed to process everything. About halfway home, she softly murmured, Pull over. I was so scared I'd see him and fall right back into being that weak version of myself. You didn't. No, she said, pulling back to look at me, tears streaming down her face. Because you were right there with me. I kissed her forehead, then her cheek, and then the corner of her mouth. I'm so proud of you. She closed her eyes, her breath catching. Nobody has ever said that to me for standing up for myself. My heart aches for her. I held her face in my hands. Then listen to me really carefully. I am so proud of you, Sophie. Not just because you chose me, but because you finally chose yourself. Her lips trembled. I love you. A nervous laugh bubbled up from her chest. You heard me. I need to hear you say it again. She rested her forehead against mine. I love you, Ethan. No more exits, Ethan. I got what she meant. Then forever. She pulled me into a kiss before I could say another word. There was nothing slow or cautious about it this time. Her hands gripped my shirt. My fingers tangled into her damp hair, and she kissed me like she'd been waiting years for this moment and was finally done waiting. By the time we pulled apart, we were both completely out of breath. Sophie rested her forehead against mine, a soft smile on her lips. Take me home. 3 months later, Sophie's clothes had officially claimed half my closet space. Her skincare products covered every inch of the bathroom counter, and my couch was covered in decorative pillows I apparently wasn't allowed to actually sit on. The spare key I'd given her sat unused on the counter because she'd finally stopped knocking before coming in. On a Saturday morning, we found ourselves right back in the exact same grocery store where everything had started. Sophie was wearing one of my oversized hoodies with her hair tossed up in a messy bun, casually pushing the cart while I checked off our list. Coffee, I called out. Got it. Eggs. In the cart. Cereal. She stopped right in front of the exact same aisle. Same shelves, same row, same brand of cereal right at eye level. Sophie grinned at me. Grab the family-size box. You haven't called me baby all morning. It's literally 9:30 a.m. Not an excuse. I glanced around the aisle and noticed an older woman pretending to inspect a melon nearby. I chuckled softly, then leaned down to whisper right in Sophie's ear. Then she reached up and kissed me right there in the middle of the cereal aisle. This time, when the word baby slipped out, it wasn't a mistake at all. It was a promise. Because Sophie Bennett wasn't just my best friend anymore. She was the girl who filled my house with laughter, the girl who finally realized that love didn't have to hurt to be real, and the girl who taught me that the scariest thing isn't telling someone how you feel. It's staying quiet while the person you love is just waiting for you to be brave. And every time she looked at me with that secret, soft smile she saved only for me, I was reminded of the moment our lives completely changed. It didn't happen at a fancy restaurant, under a sky full of fireworks, or with some grand, scripted speech. It happened right under fluorescent grocery store lights, surrounded by cereal boxes and strawberry jam, when I accidentally called my best friend baby, and she finally asked me to say it again.